Yours humans see Galactic Empire and instantly start laughing. Commander Jiwan Park stood tall on the bridge of the Earth exploration vessel. Curiosity, her dark eyes fixed on the massive space station looming before them. After decades of searching, the stars, humanity had finally made contact with the self-proclaimed eternal Galactic Empire. The crew around her worked with practiced efficiency, but she could feel their nervous energy. "Status report," Jiwan called out, adjusting her blue uniform collar. "All systems normal, Commander," replied Navigation Officer Hana, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "The Empire has granted us docking clearance at Base 17. Jiwan nodded. "Remember, everyone, we represent all of Earth today. First impressions matter." The ship glided smoothly into the docking bay, which was lined with what appeared to be honor guards, tall, spindly aliens with vibrant purple skin carrying ceremonial spears that glowed with an eerie blue light. As the airlock sealed and pressure equalized, Jiwan led her team of 5 diplomats toward the reception area. A particularly tall alien stepped forward, his purple skin stretched tight over angular features. He wore an elaborate uniform covered in so many medals and decorations that he seemed to shimmer under the station's lights. "I am Imperial Herald Du-hyun," the alien announced in a voice that sounded like it had been practiced for hours. He raised a 3-fingered hand dramatically. "You stand in the heart of the greatest civilization to ever grace the cosmos. 12,000 years of unbroken rule. 1,000 worlds bow before our might." Jiwan maintained her diplomatic smile, while Security Chief Taeyong whispered in her ear, "Scans show only 73 life forms on the entire station. Some mighty empire." The Herald continued his rehearsed speech, his voice growing increasingly theatrical. "Prepare yourselves, primitive humans, to bow before the might of his luminescence, Emperor Taiho the 427th, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, master of the cosmic flame, destroyer of the rebellion of Zeta Reticuli, supreme commander of the armada of inevitable doom." After 3 more minutes of titles, the double doors at the end of the hall finally opened. Trumpet-like instruments blared a discordant tune as smoke machines created an atmosphere of mystery. Through this elaborate entrance wadded not the towering figure of might that Jiwan had expected, but a tiny alien barely reaching her waist. Emperor Taeho wore a ceremonial headdress at least 3 times the size of his body, adorned with flashing lights and spinning ornaments that seemed to throw his balance off with every step. The tiny emperor struggled across the room, his headdress tilting precariously to one side while attendants rushed to straighten it. Jiwan bit her lip hard, feeling the first tremors of laughter building in her chest. "You will kneel," squeaked Emperor Taeho, in a voice so high-pitched it reminded her of a cartoon character. "Earth will submit to our authority or face total annihilation." Jiwan might have maintained her composure if the Emperor's headdress hadn't chosen that exact moment to tilt completely sideways, nearly toppling the tiny ruler. As attendants rushed to fix it, Communications Officer Subin let out a snort of suppressed laughter. Like a dam breaking, the human delegation's control crumbled. First came stifled giggles, then open chuckles, and finally full-blown laughter echoed through the reception hall. Jiwan tried desperately to regain control, pressing her fist against her mouth, but when the Emperor stomped his tiny foot in rage, causing his headdress to wobble dramatically in the opposite direction, she lost the battle completely. So, she tried to apologize between fits of laughter. "So sorry, it's just..." The alien delegation stared in complete bewilderment. The Herald's mouth hung open in shock, his ceremonial staff slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor. In 12,000 years of diplomatic meetings, not a single species had ever responded with anything but terrified submission. "You laugh?" the Emperor squeaked, his large eyes blinking rapidly. "At me, the destroyer of worlds?" This only triggered another round of laughter as Science Officer Hyunwoo whispered loudly enough for all to hear. "Our scans show their most powerful weapon couldn't destroy a small asteroid, let alone a world." The Emperor's purple skin darkened to an almost black shade, apparently their version of blushing. "Silence, this is not the proper protocol. You should be trembling, begging for mercy, offering tribute." Jiwan finally managed to catch her breath, wiping tears from her eyes. "Your luminescence, please forgive us. Human reactions are..." different from what you may be accustomed to. We mean no disrespect. But the damage was done. The Emperor's advisors huddled around him, whispering frantically. The herald looked as though he might faint. Among the honor guards, confused murmurs spread like wildfire. "Take them to the diplomatic quarters," the Emperor finally ordered, his voice cracking. "We must consult the ancient protocols for this unprecedented situation." As they were escorted from the reception hall, Jiwan could hear the Emperor demanding, "Why were we not informed humans respond to power with this strange facial spasm and noise? Find me everything on human psychology immediately." Back in their quarters, Security Chief Taeyong collapsed into a chair, still chuckling. "Commander, I think we just committed the worst diplomatic incident in human history." Jiwan shook her head, a smile still playing on her lips. "Maybe. Or maybe we just showed them something they've never seen before." "What's that?" asked Hana. "The ability to see through empty posturing," Jiwan replied, looking out the viewport at the surprisingly small Imperial fleet. "Something tells me this eternal empire isn't quite what it claims to be." Little did she know that their laughter had already set in motion changes that would shake the foundations of galactic society forever. Humans see Galactic Empire and instantly start laughing. Word spread through the galactic conclave like wildfire. The strange humans who had laughed in the face of Imperial might had become the only topic of conversation throughout the massive space station. Alien diplomats from 100 worlds whispered behind closed doors, servants gossiped in the corridors, and even the Imperial guards exchanged nervous glances when they thought no one was looking. Inside the Imperial Strategy Chamber, Emperor Taeho's advisors had been locked in emergency meetings for nearly 24 hours straight. "This is unprecedented," shouted Chief Strategist Minji, pounding his bony purple fist on the conference table. 12,000 years of Imperial psychological warfare tactics and they just laughed? The Emperor sat at the head of the table, his massive ceremonial headdress removed for comfort, making him look even smaller than before. His wrinkled purple face was drawn with concern. "Show me the footage again," he ordered. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the table, showing Commander Jiwan Park and her crew breaking into uncontrollable laughter during the welcoming ceremony. The Emperor winced as he watched his headdress tilting sideways. "I don't understand," said the Imperial xenopsychologist Yunju, adjusting her spectacles. "Our entrance ceremony has reduced war chiefs from the Rigelian Empire to tiers. The Andromeda Federation signed away mining rights to 3-star systems rather than face our wrath. Why are these humans different?" Across the station in the human diplomatic quarters, Commander Jiwan was facing a different kind of crisis. "We need to fix this somehow," she said, pacing the room. "We've offended them, and that's the last thing Earth needs right now. An interstellar incident with our first alien contact." Science Officer Hyunwoo looked up from his datapad. "I'm not so sure we've offended them as much as confused them. Based on the bioscan readings I took during the ceremony, their emotional state wasn't anger, it was complete bewilderment." "Makes sense," added Security Chief Taeyong, lounging casually in a chair by the viewport. "Their whole empire seems built on intimidation. When that didn't work on us, they didn't know what to do next." A chime at the door interrupted their conversation. Imperial Herald Du-hyun stood outside, his posture stiff and formal. "The Grand Imperial Council requests Ambassador Park's presence for cultural exchange discussions," he announced, his voice carefully neutral. Jiwan smoothed her uniform. "Tell them I'd be honored." When she arrived at the council chamber, she found not the full assembly she expected, but just 3 officials: Chief Strategist Min Jae, Xenopsychologist Yunju, and Cultural Affairs Director Junho. "Please be seated," Min Jae said, gesturing to a chair that was comically oversized for human proportions. "We are curious about human reactions." Jiwan sat down, feeling like a child at an adult's table. "I want to apologize for our behavior during the welcoming ceremony. Laughter is a complex human response that doesn't always indicate mockery." "Then what does it indicate?" asked Yunju, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Sometimes surprise, sometimes appreciation of irony, sometimes just release of tension, Ji-won explained. In our case, I think we were caught off guard by the contrast between the Emperor's introducing titles and his physical presence. The aliens exchanged glances. You mean, Junho said hesitantly, that you found the Emperor's size amusing compared to his power? Not exactly, Ji-won said carefully. It's more about the presentation. On Earth, leaders who need to constantly remind everyone of their power are usually the ones with the least actual power. We call it posturing or bluffing. The translation device on the table made a strange sound as it processed these concepts, and the aliens looked even more confused. But the Emperor has conquered 1,000 worlds, protested Minjae. Meanwhile, across the station, the rest of the human crew was getting an unofficial tour from a young Imperial technician named Jin Young, who seemed fascinated by the humans. And this is our central monitoring station, Jin Young said proudly, showing them a room filled with screens displaying various parts of the galaxy. Lieutenant Jisoo squinted at the displays. Wait, are these the 1,000 conquered worlds we've heard so much about? Jin Young nodded eagerly. Yes, the Emperor's domain extends across all these territories. Science Officer Hyun-woo leaned closer, studying the data scrolling beneath one of the images. But according to these readings, most of these are uninhabited moons and asteroids. Jin Young blinked his large eyes. Yes, of course, they were conquered nonetheless. Security Chief Taeyong stifled a laugh. So when the Emperor claims to have conquered 1,000 worlds, he's including rocks where nobody lives? The claim is technically accurate, Jin Young replied, seeming genuinely confused by their reaction. The tour continued to the weapons bay, where Jin Young proudly showed them the fearsome arsenal of Imperial might. Most of the weapons appeared ceremonial, covered in decorative flourishes that would make them impractical in actual combat. And this, Jin Young announced with special reverence, is the legendary Planet Crusher. They stood before what looked like an oversized mining laser mounted on a swivel base, adorned with dramatic skull carvings and flashing lights that served no apparent purpose. Impressive, said Taeyong, though his tone suggested otherwise. How does it work? When fully charged, which takes 3 standard days, it can create a focused beam capable of fracturing a small moon's crust, Jin Young explained proudly. Jisoo turned away, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Excuse me, she managed to say before hurrying from the room. Back in the council chamber, Ambassador Ji-won was struggling to explain human concepts of power and authority. In human history, true power rarely needs to announce itself so dramatically, she said. Our leaders typically demonstrate strength through actions rather than titles or ceremonies. Fascinating, murmured Yoonju, taking notes. And this laughter response, it's not a prelude to attack? Not at all, Ji-won assured her. It's often a sign of comfort or appreciation. What about these concepts you mentioned, posturing, and compensating for something? Our translators struggle with the deeper meaning, Minjae said. Ji-won hesitated, searching for diplomatic phrasing. They refer to when someone tries to appear more powerful than they actually are, like a small animal making itself look bigger to scare predators. The aliens exchanged troubled glances. Are you saying, Junho asked slowly, that the Empire appears to be pretending to be more powerful than it is? Before Ji-won could answer, the door burst open and Emperor Taiho himself entered, without his ceremonial headdress. Is this true? He demanded, his high voice cracking slightly. Your species thinks we are, what was the word? Bluffing. Your luminescence, Ji-won began carefully. Humans simply have different cultural perspectives on displays of power. As she struggled to explain without causing further offense elsewhere on the station, images and recordings of the laughing humans were being secretly shared among the younger Imperial citizens. Many had never seen such a reaction before. The concept of laughing at authority was entirely novel in their society. In a maintenance sector break room, a group of junior officers watched the recording again. They just laughed, whispered a young technician named Minsu. And nothing bad happened to them, I've never seen anyone respond to the Emperor like that, added his colleague Sunho. It's strangely liberating just to watch. Little did the Imperial leadership know that the humans had sparked something far more dangerous than diplomatic tension. They had introduced an entirely new concept to the Empire. The idea that power, when built on nothing but ceremony and exaggeration, might actually be worthy of laughter. Humans see Galactic Empire and instantly start laughing. The grand banquet hall of the Galactic Conclave had been transformed overnight. Elaborate decorations hung from every surface, skulls of extinct species, battle trophies from long-forgotten conflicts, and banners depicting the Emperor in heroic poses that bore little resemblance to reality. Servants scurried about, placing the final touches on what Emperor Taiho had decreed would be the most intimidating feast in Imperial history. More smoke effects by the entrance, ordered the Imperial event coordinator Hiesu, clapping her hands. And tell the musicians to practice the Death March of Doom again. They're still coming in flat on the screaming section. After 2 days of diplomatic awkwardness following the laughing incident, the Emperor had decided that what the humans needed was a more complete demonstration of Imperial might and culture. If they weren't impressed by his titles, surely they would be awed by the full spectacle of Imperial tradition. Commander Jiwon and her crew arrived precisely at the designated hour, now forewarned by their diplomatic liaison to prepare themselves for an important cultural event. Remember, Jiwon whispered to her team as they walked through the corridor, no matter what happens, keep your composure. Earth's future relations depend on it. Security Chief Taeyong adjusted his dress uniform. I've been practicing my serious face all morning. Science Officer Hyunwoo looked concerned. Based on what we've seen so far, that might not be enough. The massive doors to the banquet hall swung open to reveal a scene that looked like it had been designed by someone whose only reference for terrifying came from children's cartoons. Red lighting cast ominous shadows, fog machines created an ankle-deep mist, and what appeared to be the Imperial Orchestra played a discordant tune on instruments that resembled tortured plumbing pipes. Herald Do-hyun stood at attention beside the door. Presenting the human delegation from the insignificant planet Earth, he announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Emperor Taiho sat on an elevated throne that made him appear taller than he was, his ceremonial headdress now supported by nearly invisible wires from the ceiling to prevent another tilting incident. He raised a tiny hand, and the music stopped abruptly. "Humans," he called out. "Prepare to experience the full cultural might of the eternal Galactic Empire." What followed was 3 hours of what the Empire considered their most intimidating rituals. First came the Warriors of Doom, a group of purple-skinned soldiers who performed what was supposed to be a terrifying battle dance, but looked more like an awkward hopping motion synchronized to drum beats. "They're demonstrating how they crush their enemies," whispered the helpful translator, as the warriors hopped from one foot to another, occasionally spinning in circles. Jiwon nodded solemnly, digging her fingernails into her palm to maintain her composure. Beside her, Communications Officer Subin was studying the ceiling with intense concentration, clearly using every ounce of her willpower not to laugh. Next came the recitation of conquests, where a poet laureate delivered what sounded suspiciously like corporate jingles about various planets the Empire had supposedly subjugated. The moons of Xandar fell in just 1 day. The Empire's might made all their leaders pay. Xandar, Xandar, now they all obey. By the time they reached the 15th conquered world's jingle, even the most disciplined of the human delegation were struggling. Lieutenant Jisoo had developed a sudden coughing fit that required her to hold a napkin over her face, while Hyunwoo appeared to be taking extremely detailed notes that, upon closer inspection, were actually doodles of the Emperor, with an even larger headdress. "And now," announced the Emperor, "we will unveil for you forbidden technologies that no outsider has ever witnessed." Servants wheeled in what looked like ordinary entertainment systems, albeit with excessive decorative spikes and unnecessary, blinking lights. "Behold, the Mind Dominator." The Emperor gestured dramatically at what was clearly a holographic entertainment system. "With this, We can make any being see whatever we wish them to see. To demonstrate, they played what appeared to be a standard projection of space scenes. Impressive, G1 said diplomatically. On Earth, we call something similar to this movies or television. The Emperor's eye stalks twitched in surprise. You have such technology? For about 200 years now, yes. An uncomfortable silence followed before the Emperor quickly moved on to the next display. After the technological showcase concluded, Emperor Taiho announced it was the humans' turn to share their culture. This was the moment Jiwan had been dreading. We've prepared a small sample of human entertainment, she said carefully. Since you showed us your battle dances, perhaps we could share some of our performance art. With some reluctance, she nodded to Subin, who activated a datapad connected to the Imperial projection system. The screen lit up with a classic comedy routine from Earth's archives. At first, the Imperial audience watched in confused silence as the human comedian on screen delivered a series of jokes about everyday life. When the punchline hit and laughter erupted from the audience in the recording, several aliens gasped in shock. Why are they making that noise? Are they in pain? Asked Chief Strategist Minjae, looking genuinely concerned. No, they're laughing because they find it funny, explained Jiwon. Funny, repeated xenopsychologist Yunju as though testing an unfamiliar word. And this funny is desirable? Generally, yes. The next clip showed a scene from a popular action movie featuring an over-the-top explosion as the hero narrowly escaped. Your historical documentation is deeply flawed, announced Cultural Affairs Director Junho with surprising confidence. Explosions do not look like that. They are much more colorful and last much longer. He gestured to a nearby aide. Show them our educational films about our victory at Betelgeuse. The screen switched to what was obviously an Imperial propaganda film, featuring explosions that defied the laws of physics, lingered for dramatic effect and were accompanied by musical flourishes. I see, said Jiwan, struggling to find diplomatic words. Our filmmakers aim for a different style of realism. As the cultural exchange continued, the gap in understanding only widened. The Empire couldn't comprehend why humans would intentionally seek out entertainment that made them laugh, while the humans couldn't understand how anyone could take the Empire's overwrought displays of intimidation seriously. When Hyunwoo tried to explain the concept of comedy, that humans often find humor in the unexpected or the incongruous, the Imperial scholars took diligent notes but looked utterly bewildered. So you deliberately create situations that cause this laughter reaction? Asked Yunju, clearly struggling with the concept. But earlier you said laughter can be involuntary when something appears ridiculous or disproportionate. Jiwon saw the dangerous direction this conversation was heading. Perhaps we should move on to sharing information about our respective governance systems, she suggested quickly. By the end of the evening, both sides were exhausted from the effort of trying to communicate across a cultural divide that seemed to grow wider with every exchange. The human delegation returned to their quarters feeling as though they'd accomplished nothing. I don't think they have any concept of humor, sighed Subin, collapsing into a chair. How do you explain funny to someone who's never experienced it? Did you see their faces when we showed them the comedy clip? Taeyong asked. You'd think we were showing them some kind of torture. Jiwon stared out the viewport at the stars. The problem isn't just that they don't understand humor. It's that their entire society is built around performances of power that we find inherently ridiculous. And our natural reaction threatens that power, Hyunwoo concluded thoughtfully. No wonder they're so confused. What none of them realized was that their cultural presentation had not been a complete failure. In the monitoring room adjacent to the banquet hall, a group of young Imperial technicians had been watching the entire exchange with growing fascination. Did you see what happened when they showed that comedy thing? Whispered Technician Minsu to his colleagues. The humans on the screen made that same noise, that laughter, that our humans made when they first met the Emperor. And they do it on purpose, added his colleague Sunho with wonder in his voice. They actually seek out things that cause that reaction. Junior Administrator Jinwoo, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. What if they're right? What if all our ceremonies really are as, what's the word they used? Ridiculous, as they seem to think. The others looked at him in shock, but also with a new glimmer of something that had never before existed in the Empire's long history: doubt about the seriousness of their own cultural practices. Humans see Galactic Empire and instantly start laughing. 3 days after the cultural exchange disaster, Commander Jiwan was awakened by an urgent knock on her quarters door. She found Security Chief Taeyong standing outside, looking unusually concerned. "Commander, you need to see this," he said, handing her a data pad. Jiwan rubbed sleep from her eyes and looked at the screen. It showed security footage from one of the lower levels of the station. A group of young Imperial citizens were gathered in what appeared to be a maintenance area. What struck her immediately was that they were wearing makeshift headdresses clearly meant to mock the Emperor's ceremonial crown. Even more shocking, they were attempting to make each other laugh. "When did this start?" she asked, suddenly wide awake. "As far as we can tell, about 6 hours ago. It's spreading through the lower ranks of the station staff like wildfire." Jiwan quickly dressed and assembled her senior officers in their meeting room. Science Officer Hyunwoo and Communications Officer Subin arrived looking as concerned as Taeyong. "We've accidentally started a cultural revolution," Hyunwoo stated bluntly, pulling up more footage on the main screen. "Look at this." The screen showed various scenes from around the station. Young Imperial citizens mimicking the Emperor's waddle, groups gathered around smuggled copies of Earth comedy shows, and most alarmingly, staff members practicing how to laugh. "It would be funny if it weren't so serious," Subin said. "They've never had anything like humor in their society before. It's like we've introduced a completely new emotion." Jiwan paced the room. "The Emperor is going to think we did this deliberately, that we're undermining his authority." "Aren't we, though?" Taeyong asked. "I mean, not intentionally, but that's exactly what's happening." Before anyone could respond, the communication panel chimed. "Ambassador Park," came the voice of Imperial Herald Do-hyun, sounding unusually strained. "Your presence is requested in the Imperial Council chamber immediately. Alone." The walk to the council chamber felt like the longest of Jiwan's life. As she passed through the corridors, she noticed Imperial guards eyeing her with a mixture of suspicion and, more worryingly, curiosity. Twice she spotted staff members quickly hiding what looked like crude imitations of the Emperor's headdress. When she arrived, she found not the full council as expected, but only Emperor Taiho and Sub-Administrator Jinwoo, a younger official. She had met briefly during previous meetings. "Ambassador," the Emperor said, his voice lacking its usual theatrical quality. "Explain what your people have done to mine." Jiwan chose her words carefully. "Your luminescence, if you're referring to the changes in behavior among some of your citizens, I assure you we never intended—" "They're laughing," the Emperor interrupted, slamming his tiny fist on the arm of his throne. "In corridors, in maintenance bays, even in the sacred hall of ancestors. 2 guards were caught mimicking my walk yesterday." "My walk?" Sub-Administrator Jinwoo stood slightly behind the Emperor, and Jiwan was surprised to see that he didn't share his leader's outrage. In fact, he appeared to be fighting to keep his expression neutral. "The concept of humor is new to your society," Jiwan acknowledged. "Humans don't view laughter as disrespectful, but as a natural response to—" "To what?" demanded the Emperor. "To authority? To 12,000 years of tradition? To the unexpected," Jiwan said gently. "To the recognition of contrasts or contradictions. Sometimes to the gap between what something appears to be and what it actually is." The Emperor's eye stalks quivered with what might have been anger or fear. "You've infected my people with this disease of disrespect." "Humor isn't disrespect," Jiwan countered. "Some of Earth's most respected leaders were known for their sense of humor. The ability to laugh, especially at oneself, is considered a sign of wisdom and confidence where I come from." As they spoke, the situation elsewhere on the station was evolving rapidly. In a large maintenance bay that had been converted into an unofficial meeting space, Sub-Administrator Jinwoo's close friend, Junior Engineering Officer Q1, addressed a growing crowd of young Imperial citizens. For 12,000 years we've been told that the way to command respect is through fear, Q1 said, standing on an overturned crate. We've been taught that power comes from making others tremble, but the humans have shown us something different. The gathered crowd murmured in agreement. Many wore small symbolic mockeries of imperial regalia, simplified versions of the emperor's headdress made from maintenance tools and spare parts. They don't fear what they find absurd, continued Q1. And once you start seeing the absurdity of something, you can't unsee it. At the back of the crowd, technical specialist Sunho demonstrated the human concept of a joke to a group of fascinated colleagues. Why did the Imperial Guard cross the sacred hallway? He asked, barely containing his newly discovered sense of humor. I don't know. Why? Asked an eager listener. Because the Emperor's headdress was blocking the other path, the group erupted in unpracticed but genuine laughter, a sound previously unknown in Imperial culture. Nearby, others were attempting to master the art of sarcasm, with mixed results. Oh yes, the Emperor's collection of conquered uninhabited rocks is very impressive, said one, emphasizing the word as they'd heard humans do. Back in the council chamber, Emperor Taiho was becoming increasingly agitated. You must address your crew, he insisted to Jiwan. Tell them to stop sharing this humor with my people. With respect, your luminescence, I don't think that's possible, Jiwan replied. The concept itself has spread. Even if we left today, your people have been exposed to the idea that authority can be questioned through humor. Sub-administrator Jinwoo finally spoke up. Emperor, perhaps instead of fighting this change, we could try to understand it. The humans don't seem weaker for their ability to laugh. If anything, it appears to strengthen their social bonds. The Emperor turned to Jinwoo with suspicion. You sound like you admire this behavior. I'm merely suggesting that if so many of our people find this new concept appealing, perhaps there's something valuable in it that we've been missing. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden blaring of alarm sirens. The communication panel on the wall lit up with the face of a panicked Imperial Guard. Your luminescence. There's a gathering in the main promenade, hundreds of citizens wearing mockeries of Imperial regalia. They're laughing at the Eternal Monument. The Emperor rose from his throne, eye stalks rigid with shock. This is insurrection. Ji-Wan and the Emperor, accompanied by Jinwoo and a contingent of guards, made their way to the main promenade. What they found was not the violent uprising the Emperor had feared, but something perhaps more threatening to imperial power, a celebration. Hundreds of imperial citizens had gathered around the massive statue of Emperor Taiho that dominated the promenade. Many wore homemade versions of his ceremonial headdress, deliberately oversized and ridiculous. A young female technician named Minji stood on the statue's base, delivering a mocking imitation of the Emperor's speech from the welcoming ceremony. Bow before my tiny body and enormous hat, she proclaimed in a squeaky voice that was an eerily accurate impression of the Emperor's. Fear my collection of uninhabited rocks and mining lasers that take 3 days to charge. The crowd roared with laughter. Unpracticed, awkward, but unmistakably genuine. It was the sound of a species discovering a new emotion, a new way of seeing the world. Arrest them all, the Emperor squeaked, but his guards hesitated, many of them clearly fighting their own impulses to join the laughter. Jinwoo stepped forward. Your luminescence? These are not rebels or traitors. They're your citizens discovering something new, something that undermines everything our society is built on, the Emperor protested. Ji-Wan watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and concern. She had come to forge diplomatic ties between Earth and the Empire, not to spark a cultural revolution. Yet she couldn't help but feel that what was happening was, in some strange way, progress. Sometimes, she said quietly to the Emperor, societies need to evolve. The ones that can't adapt eventually crumble. As the Emperor stood frozen with indecision, the crowd noticed his presence. Instead of dispersing in fear as they once would have, they turned toward him with newfound confidence. Q1 stepped forward from the crowd. We don't want to overthrow you, he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed promenade. We just want to be allowed to laugh." The simplicity of the request hung in the air, a challenge to 12,000 years of rule by fear and intimidation. The Emperor looked out at the faces of his people, not cowering, not trembling, but waiting expectantly for his response. And in that moment, the fate of the eternal Galactic Empire hung in the balance, transformed forever by humanity's most unexpected weapon: laughter. Humans see Galactic Empire and instantly start laughing. The tension in the main promenade was thick enough to cut with a laser. Emperor Taiho stood before his transformed citizens, his small purple face contorted with conflicting emotions. The once feared ruler of the Thousand Worlds seemed suddenly diminished, not by force or rebellion, but by something far more powerful: the simple inability of his people to take him seriously anymore. "You leave me no choice," the Emperor finally announced, his high-pitched voice echoing through the silent crowd. "I must demonstrate the true might of the Empire." He turned to his chief weapons officer, Dong Ho. "Prepare the Planet Crusher. Target the uninhabited moon in Sector 7. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The Planet Crusher had never been used in living memory. It existed more as a threat than an actual weapon. Commander Jiwan exchanged alarmed glances with Sub-Administrator Jinwoo. "Your luminescence," Jinwoo began cautiously. "Perhaps a demonstration of such power isn't "Silence," squeaked the Emperor. "My authority will be respected." The crowd parted as Imperial guards escorted the Emperor, his advisors, and the human delegation to the station's main observation deck. Word spread quickly throughout the conclave, and soon thousands of Imperial citizens were gathering in viewing areas, their newly discovered capacity for skepticism clear in their murmured conversations. The observation deck offered a panoramic view of space, including the small, rocky moon that was to be the target of the Empire's wrath. Weapons Officer Dong Ho stood nervously at the control panel, occasionally glancing at Jinwoo as if seeking reassurance. "Begin the charging sequence," ordered the Emperor, settling into his command chair, which had been hastily fitted with booster cushions to make him appear taller. Warning lights flashed as the ancient weapon system came to life. On the main screen they could see the Planet Crusher, an outsized cannon adorned with unnecessary spikes and dramatically painted skulls, slowly positioning itself toward the target. "Charging will take approximately 3 standard days," announced Dong Ho, studying the readouts. The Emperor's eye stalks twitched in annoyance. "Unacceptable. Use the emergency power reserves." "But your luminescence. The emergency reserves are for..." "Do as I command." Dong Ho reluctantly entered the override codes, and the weapon's power indicators jumped dramatically. The lights throughout the station dimmed momentarily as power was diverted to the ancient weapon. "Charging accelerated. Target acquisition in progress," Dong Ho announced, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Firing sequence can commence in 3 minutes." As the countdown began, Commander Jiwan quietly moved closer to Science Officer Hyunwoo, who had been allowed to bring scanning equipment to observe the demonstration. "What are your readings telling you?" she whispered. Hyunwoo frowned at his instruments. "Something's not right. The power signatures are all over the place. I think their rush to charge it is causing some kind of malfunction." The final seconds of the countdown echoed through the observation deck. 3, 2, 1, firing. The massive weapon shuddered, its barrel glowing with what should have been destructive energy. A tremor ran through the station as the Planet Crusher discharged with a thunderous boom that could be felt even through the vacuum of space. But instead of a devastating beam of energy, what erupted from the weapon was a cloud of colorful particles that sparkled and danced in the void of space. Someone in the back of the observation deck snorted. Then another person let out a giggle. Within seconds, waves of laughter swept through the gathered crowd as the supposedly fearsome Planet Crusher continued to spew what looked remarkably like party confetti into the darkness of space. The Emperor sat frozen in his command chair, eye stalks rigid with shock and humiliation. His ultimate demonstration of power had turned into the final confirmation of what the humans had inadvertently revealed. The Empire's fearsome reputation was built on elaborate ceremonies and exaggerated histories, not actual might. "It appears," Security Chief Taeyong whispered to Jiwon, that their ancient superweapon was mainly designed to look scary, rather than actually do damage. Like everything else in this empire, Jiwan replied quietly. Chief Weapons Officer Dongho was frantically checking systems. Your luminescence, it seems the accelerated charging process has caused the weapon to malfunction. The projectile cores have degraded over the centuries into shiny dust, finished Jinwoo, no longer attempting to hide his smile. The Emperor slowly rose from his command chair, his small shoulders slumped in defeat. The observation deck had fallen silent, all eyes on the diminutive ruler whose facade of power had literally dissolved into sparkles before their eyes. 12,000 years, he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual theatrical quality. For 12,000 years, my ancestors ruled through fear. The mere threat of our weapons kept 1,000 worlds in line. No one ever called our bluff. He turned to face Commander Jiwan. Until you humans came along with your laughter. The moment hung in the air, heavy with 12 millennia of history balanced against a few days of transformation. Then, to everyone's shock, the Emperor did something unprecedented in Imperial history. He chuckled. It was a small sound at first, unpracticed and hesitant, but it grew stronger as he looked out at the still dispersing cloud of colorful particles that represented the last vestige of his fearsome reputation. It is rather absurd, isn't it? He said, his high voice carrying a new note of genuine amusement. All this time, ruling an empire of mostly uninhabited rocks threatening with weapons that shoot sparkles, wearing a headdress so large I can barely keep my head up. A ripple of cautious laughter spread through the observation deck. The sound seemed to strengthen the Emperor rather than diminish him. For the first time, he was connecting with his people not through fear, but through shared recognition of the absurd. 2 weeks later, the main assembly hall of the Galactic Conclave had been transformed. Gone were the intimidating skulls and battle trophies, replaced by comfortable seating arranged in a circle rather than facing an imposing throne. Representatives from all sectors of what was now being called the Galactic Cooperative gathered for the ratification of a new charter. In the center of the circle stood former Emperor Taiho, now simply Counselor Taiho, alongside Sub-Administrator Jinwoo, who had been elected as the first chairperson of the new Galactic Council. Ambassador Jiwan and her crew represented Earth in this historic moment. With the signing of this charter, announced Jinwoo, we formally dissolve the Eternal Galactic Empire and establish the Galactic Cooperative, a union of worlds based on honest communication, mutual respect, and cooperation. Taiho stepped forward, now wearing a deliberately small ceremonial crown that bobbled comically when he moved, a self-deprecating joke that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. For thousands of years, he said, his voice clear and unburdened by forced gravitas, my ancestors ruled through fear and intimidation. We constructed an elaborate facade of power to keep others in line. But our human friends showed us something more valuable than fear, the ability to recognize absurdity, including in ourselves. He turned to Jiwan with genuine respect. Ambassador Park, would you do us the honor of being the first Earth representative to the Galactic Council? 3 months later, the grand reopening ceremony of the conclave drew visitors from across the galaxy. The station had been redesigned, the oppressive imperial aesthetics replaced with open spaces and transparent viewports that emphasized connection rather than intimidation. In one of the station's largest gathering spaces, former Emperor Taiho stood before a mixed audience of humans and former imperial citizens, delivering what would have once been unimaginable, a comedy routine about his former life. So there I was, he said, timing his delivery as Commander Jiwan had taught him, wearing a headdress so large I needed neck supports, pretending I could destroy planets when our most fearsome weapon couldn't heat up my morning beverage, the Diao. Audience roared with laughter. The former imperial citizens still somewhat awkward in their expression of humor, but improving every day. The worst part, Taiho continued, warming to his subject, was the titles. Do you know how long it took to memorize Emperor Taiho the 427th, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, master of the cosmic flame, destroyer of the rebellion of Zeta Reticuli, supreme commander of the armada of inevitable doom, longer than it took to actually conquer those uninhabited rocks we called worlds. From her seat beside Chairperson Jinwoo, Jiwon watched with satisfaction. What had begun as a diplomatic disaster had transformed into something remarkable. Not just an alliance between Earth and the former empire, but a fundamental change in an entire civilization. You know, Jinwoo said quietly to her. Before you humans arrived, our society had no concept of humor, no understanding of laughter. We built everything on fear and appearance. You gave us something we didn't even know we were missing. What's that? Asked Jiwon. The ability to see ourselves clearly, he replied, and to find joy in that clarity, rather than fear it. On the stage, Taiho concluded his routine by placing his deliberately tiny crown at a jaunty angle. The real power, he said, suddenly serious despite his comical appearance, was never in making others fear us. It was in having the courage to see ourselves honestly and still find reasons to carry on. As applause filled the hall, the sound of two cultures united not by fear or even by diplomacy, but by shared laughter. Jiwon reflected that of all the ways humanity might have made its mark on the galaxy, teaching an ancient civilization how to laugh at itself might be the most profound contribution of all.